Welcome back to the It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership podcast. I, as always, am your host. My name is Kevin Goldsmith, and every episode I try and bring you lessons about leadership and management, specifically in technology, where I have worked for 34, almost 35 years now. This episode is going to be the last one before I take a little break. I did that last summer. I found that really helpful. The next few episodes are going to be encores. Well, there'll be an episode just like always, but I'm going to reach back into the archive because now there are a bunch of older episodes, some that you probably haven't heard, or if you did hear, you haven't heard in a while. So I'm going to bring back some of those that you might have missed that I think are good and worth revisiting. While I'm gone, though, I'm going to ask you all to do something for me. I do get questions from folks periodically. Last year, I did a concerted effort to do a bunch of Q&A episodes where I answered your questions. I'd like to do that again, but that will depend on you actually sending me your questions. So while I'm gone, please send your questions, stuff about this episode, prior episodes, problems you're facing at work, challenges you have for your own career development. Send those to contact@itdependsbook.net. You can also send them to me on Blue Sky. My official ID there is @kevingoldsmith.com. So you can reach me that way on Blue Sky. You can send it to me on Threads. I'm Kevin Goldsmith on Threads. You can send it to me on LinkedIn, whatever is convenient for you. But I would love to get some questions from you all that I could answer if there's things that are coming up that you need help with, or things that I wasn't clear about that you would like more clarity on. In this episode, we're going to talk about driving change in teams that you are not responsible for. So managing sideways. I know I've been talking about managing up a lot for the last few episodes, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. This is also a very common problem that I see from both people I mentor and just that I've experienced as well. If you're wondering what that means, let me give you an example. Let's say that you're in a meeting, you've got a room full of other managers, and you're trying to solve a problem that your organization has, and you come up with a shared approach and everyone agrees, yeah, this is much better, and everyone's nodding, yeah, this is the better way to go, and then nothing happens. This is extremely common. The idea was good, the logic around it was sound. 6 months later, though, every team is still doing things in their own way, exactly as they used to. Nothing happened because agreeing was free and changing was not. And nobody in the room actually had to do the changing. No one was forcing the change. This is on my mind now because this problem keeps showing up from two different directions at once. There is someone I'm mentoring who is trying to get independent divisions to standardize on a shared platform with no mandate to make any of them do it. They all are doing things in their own way. Each team has got their own solution to this problem. His team has generated what he feels strongly is a much better solution to this problem and is hoping to get other teams to adopt that so that there's a common way of solving this problem. But none of the other teams has to do it. They can continue to do it their own way. Each division owns its own stack, and the only place that the organization formally aligns is at the very top. So the question to me was, hey, how do I get all the senior managers aligned to force all those teams to adopt our platform? That was the question to me. Another person is trying to set sane ownership rules now that people outside engineering have started pushing changes into engineering workflows in this new AI world we're living in. That work is flowing across a boundary that nobody officially owns. So if a PM now feels empowered or is empowered to make code changes, but there's no process for that, there's no clear ownership around that, PM's not going to do on-call for it. How did this person either stop it from happening? They are not responsible for the PM or for some of the other processes. Or how do they enforce a better way of doing it? You can't org chart your way to something you don't own. You can appeal to senior leadership, can sometimes be effective. Speaking as a senior leader with people appealing things to me for years and years and years. Yeah, sometimes I feel strongly about the problem. as strongly as the person. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting problem. This is not the most important thing in my world. And so I will get to it when I get to it, which sadly oftentimes is never, because there's other things going on in the organization that are higher priority. And so that leaves a person very frustrated because they're hoping that I could just solve the problem for them using my role power. And sometimes I can or will if it's a really serious problem. And if it isn't, and I've got other things that are higher priority, I may just not get to it. It may be really painful for you. And I understand that. And I'm going to try and help you. And that's where I'm going to be mentoring you or advising you to try and figure out how to influence this yourself without using me as the hammer. So this is influence without authority. It is one of the crucial leadership skills and is one of the hardest to develop, speaking from experience. If you've talked to developers who are looking for that higher title, I need to be a staff engineer, or I need to be a principal engineer, or an announcement, you have to tell everyone that I am responsible or I own this technology. Or if they're looking to move into management, but not because they're excited about all the stuff we talk about, things like influence without authority and supporting people and developing people and doing all these kinds of things. But what they really want to move into management for is so that they can force people to accept their plan for something. I know this is the right way to do it. I can't convince anybody else this is the right way to do it. So give me a title or give me formal ownership or let me move into management so that I can impose what I know is the right way to do things. And I don't have to argue with people. I can just say, I'm a staff engineer, so you have to do it. Or I own this, so you have to do it. Or I'm your manager, so do what I say. If you've had that conversation, and boy, have I, over the years, many, 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 many times, if I had that conversation with people, this is an indication that those folks have not developed the skill of influencing without authority. They're counting on role power to win an argument effectively. But even at my level, I have in the technology team, I have all the role power. I'm the CTO. So by that very fact, I can force my will onto the technology team, but I can't do that for the product team. I can't do that for marketing. I can't do that for finance or the ops teams. I can't force them to do anything. I have to convince them that this is a good idea. I have to convince them that this is better for the organization. I still need the ability to influence without authority. I can't just appeal to the CEO to make these other teams do the thing that I think they need to do. I need them to agree with me that this is a good thing for them to put their time into or put their resources into, or give me resources to do something that I think is important. So this requirement, this skill is valuable all the way up, even the CEO, because even if you're the CEO, you can use role power to make things happen all the time, right? The only ones you report to are the board, and you have no peers. So as a CEO, you can force anything to happen, and you have that via your role power. But if you lean too heavily in that at any level, as an engineering manager or even a team lead, as a staff engineer, as a director, VP, CTO, whatever, if you lean too much into that role power in order to make things happen, you erode the trust with your own organization and you create massive morale problems. This is where you hear about the micromanaging managers or everything is so top down. Those are organizations where people are leading with role power and not influencing without using their authority. You might have heard this trade-off as telling versus selling. So telling is using your role power. Selling is trying to influence without authority. You need to be able to do both, and you need to be able to choose when to do one versus the other. But a lot of times, and for a lot of you, your role power is pretty limited. You might be a lead of a team, you might be a manager of a team, but you have no ability to influence the teams around you. This is where this is absolutely crucial. The surface question is, how do I get these other teams or these other people to adopt this thing I want them to adopt? But the real tension is that the two obvious levers are both unavailable to you. You can't order it because you don't have authority over those teams. You can't wait for someone above to order it because across-team mandates either never come or arrive too weak to enforce. That's what I mean when I say maybe you can appeal to me as your CTO. I'm going to try and sell it, but I'm selling it weakly because I'm selling it for you. I don't have the same context you do around it. The competing forces that you're going to feel pulled between: speed versus durability. A borrowed mandate from an executive or a senior leader gets fast compliance. If you get me to drop the hammer, and I do, all right, you're going to get people to comply, but it's going to be very shallow buy-in. That evaporates the moment that pressure moves on. Even if you get your director or VP or CTO or CEO to say, I agree with you, we should do this, and I'm going to tell everybody we should do this. So everyone hears, oh, we got to do it. But meanwhile, that executive has moved on and is solving the next set of problems. And so that pressure evaporates relatively quickly. So they'll buy in as long as they feel they need to be bought in. But if they didn't agree and they're sort of forced to comply, the minute they don't feel that pressure, they back off. The other force is being right versus being adopted. The strength of your idea and the willingness of others to change their work are almost 100% unrelated variables. So even if you have a great idea, that doesn't necessarily mean others are ready to change what they're doing. They are working on what they think is most important. You've convinced them that the thing you want them to do is super important, but they got other super important things to do. You feel the urgency, they don't. So you have to have them feel that same level of urgency, or at least enough urgency that they're willing to carve out some time to support your idea. What's at stake if this is handled poorly is that you burn credibility on a thing that stalls. You make the other teams defensive because you're forcing them into doing things. And you teach the organization that your initiatives are something to wait out. So if you are borrowing authority by appealing to someone with more role power to force things down into the organization that people disagree with, they will support them very weakly and only as long as they feel obligated to do so. And you are teaching them that this is the way you solve these problems. So they're going to be much less likely to support you in the future, much more likely to challenge when you do that appeal to a higher role power. They're going to be much more willing to go to that person, possibly even in advance, to argue against what you're arguing for so that they don't feel it imposed upon them. And when you do get them to do something, either by force or by some other means, they're going to drag their heels as long as they can because they think they can just wait it out. Being right is the cheapest part. Being adopted is the expensive part. One of the most successful versions of me doing this fairly well was when I was at Spotify and I built the technology career steps. And I know I've talked about that a lot on the podcast. It was a very big project. It was a very important project for me. But also, I was a VP of engineering. I wasn't the only VP of engineering. I had peers. And Spotify was a company that if you know anything about the Spotify model, you would know that Spotify, especially when I was there, was known for autonomous teams. And that autonomy was very strongly felt and very strongly understood. So even as a leader of my own organization, I had to be very careful with that tell versus sell. I could impose my authority. These folks did work for me, but I couldn't do that too much because in any organization, that's going to cause problems. In a highly autonomous organization, that's going to cause a lot of problems. So I had to be very, very, very careful about that, about when I would use that tool. So what worked was not a top-down, here it is, you all need to adopt it now, go use it. It was building a coalition. I could have gone off in a garret and written out the new career pathing model for Spotify technology and then appealed to my CTO, who is the one who gave me the responsibility to force that down onto all the teams, that would have been a massive and probably immediate failure. Instead, what I had to do was solicit folks from across the organization, build a coalition, build a very inclusive way of building these things, and then do a rollout, bringing people into the process with lots of feedback before it was fully implemented, and giving people a chance to try it and understand it and respond and do all that. It took a lot longer than it would have if I just spent a couple days designing one and then had it forced on everybody. However, that meant that this was something that people had time to get to understand, time to question and challenge, even though obviously we couldn't take everybody's feedback exactly as they did it and make those changes, but at least people knew that they were heard and they would get a thoughtful response if we couldn't do something or it didn't make sense, so that they felt included. And we gave them time to get used to it. We rolled it out progressively. We gave people a chance to try it. And that was a critical way for that organization. Would you do that in every organization? Maybe, maybe not. Different organizational cultures require different solutions. But we tailored something to that organization. We made them feel involved. We gave them time to adjust. And that was that important influence piece, that everyone felt heard, everyone felt involved. So it wasn't this thing that was being imposed upon them top down. It was something that they felt some level of ownership in. A counterexample of that, where I didn't have role power, I didn't have authority, but I had the ability to appeal and leveraged more senior leader to enforce my will, which didn't work that well. It was one of the first things I worked on at Adobe, was building what was called Adobe Help Center. Each product had their own help systems that were incompatible and didn't update except by updating over DVD or CD, which meant that they would get out of date or they couldn't be updated. And the idea was, let's add the capability to update things over the internet, which was a totally reasonable thing. But that means you all need to adopt a common system. This was something that had been decided by leadership. My team was building it, and I would go from team to team to make sure that they were using it and adopting it. And I would encounter teams. These were product teams, and product teams at Adobe. They were their own businesses, and they had deadlines because we were shipping on CDs and DVDs. And so any new external dependency was a risk for them. And I encountered leaders who would just say to me, yeah, this sounds great, but we're not going to do it because our system works fine. We don't care. I'm not depending on this new thing that hasn't been proven and tying my release schedule to you. And so I dropped the hammer on that team and basically said, okay, well, I'm going to go talk to leadership. You will get no help documentation. You will ship without any help system because this is the way we're doing it. And I basically forced it. And I won that argument because that person knew I could appeal to authority and get that forced in because it was already the decision. So they stepped back. But the minute we had any challenges in that process, oh, you got to believe that team was super vocal about it, made sure everybody knew we were screwing everything up. They were coming for us at every moment, and they were challenging us as much as they could because this was not something they agreed to. This is something forced upon them. And also, that leader never liked me, probably still doesn't. That made it challenging for me as somebody trying to grow in the organization. So you can do it. I did. It shipped. It worked. Yay. The project was successful, but we forced it in some places. A lot of teams just were very happy to take it. But in that particular team, we created enemies, and they were very happy to challenge us every place they could. And that made everything harder for that project moving from then on. What I learned from that experience, I brought to the next project at Adobe. And that also very much informed the Spotify career steps because that was a few years later. My next project at Adobe, I talked about, I think in the last episode, which was a new, much more advanced shared technology doing heterogeneous computing of signal processing for Photoshop and After Effects and all these other products. And what I knew, having learned this from that first project, was I can try and get senior leadership to say everyone needs to use it, but that's going to be really unlikely to be successful. Any team that's forced upon, not only going to be not a supporter, they're going to be a detractor. So instead, I need to influence without authority. I need to convince every team that this is something that not only is going to be helpful for them, but is going to be something that they couldn't do on their own. And so I talked a lot about this in that episode, working team by team and finding the teams that were most open to it, and then working really carefully with them to take in their needs and make sure that their needs were being met, and making sure the team was excelling at delivering against those needs, and just putting in the work so that they felt like they were happy with not only the technology, but the team delivering it. They became supporters within the organization, which absolutely encouraged other teams who were maybe on the fence to now be open to discussion and be open to taking on that technology. Let me give you a framework. I always like to give you a framework. I'm going to give you a 4-move sequence for spreading change across teams you don't control. Recruit the first mover. Start with the team that already has a reason to want the change that you're trying to bring, not the one whose resistance worries you the most. Early effort spent on the loudest skeptic is usually wasted. A lot of times, the natural feeling is, let me go to the team that I know is not going to like this, and let me convince them. Because if I can convince them, I can convince everybody. That is the wrong way to go about it, because they're going to fight you and fight you and fight you. You're going to make no progress. And maybe you do convince them in the end, but it takes a long time and there's a lot of energy there. And maybe you never do. And meanwhile, you've gotten no adoption. And if you are trying to bring change within an organization and you're spending a lot of time and getting no results, that's a project that usually is going to get canceled because you've shown no results. So instead, start with the team that is the most reason to want it. Get that early adoption. Price it as a favor, not a tax. Frame adoption around the work it removes for these other teams, not around your initiative or better technology. If the pitch is that you'll feel good when they comply, you've already lost. You need to understand other teams' incentives, and you might remember I did an episode called The P Word, which is about politics at work. That's a good grounding on this idea of understanding other teams' incentives so you can appeal and support those incentives, which gives you a much better opportunity to get that buy-in, that natural buy-in, without having to do that appeal to a higher role power. What you want to do is appeal to how your solution is going to help them achieve their goals, not be something else, a new goal that they also have to achieve in addition to whatever they're incentivized to achieve. This, by the way, classic sales technique. This is one of the things that salespeople do. If you get vendor mail as much as I do, you'll see a very common pattern. You must be dealing with this problem. We have a way to solve this problem. Or many leaders have this problem. We can solve that problem. That's what you do in sales. You need to be a little bit of a salesman. That is part of getting other teams to adopt change, is making them see that the change you're bringing is actually going to help them achieve what they're incentivized to achieve, not make it harder for them to achieve that. Let the results recruit the next team. Make that first adopters win visible enough that the second team asks to join rather than being told to. Proof travels further than persuasion. In prior episodes, I've talked about taking a victory lap. Your team has invented a cool new technology and you think everyone's going to get super excited about it, and maybe they will. That's great. Getting another team to adopt it and then having them show what they've done with it, that's an even better victory lap. because now you're not advocating for the thing your team has created. Someone else is advocating for the thing your team created. That is really important to all the other teams that aren't your team. Is hearing another team talk about the success they've had with something your team has developed. And this is not technology specific. It could also be a process or whatever. That shows proof of value, and they're absolutely going to be much more inclined to adopt it because they're hearing from a third party that it's been useful for them. And finally, settle ownership before scale. Decides who maintains the shared thing and who arbitrates disputes before adoption spreads, or the whole thing collapses into a tragedy that commons the first time two teams disagree. I absolutely had this challenge at Adobe with this technology my team built because I wanted every team to be successful. Sometimes they had disagreements about what they wanted, or they wanted different things that were in conflict with each other. I had to be exceptionally careful about those conflicts and resolving those conflicts in a way that all teams were happy. This is maybe different than the kind of thing you're trying to build. In my case, this was a technology that my team was built to own and built to be responsible for. So we were always going to be the owners of it. And as the leader of that team, I was going to be the final arbiter on which way we'd go. But of course, I'm trying to be inclusive and I'm trying to make sure that teams are arguing with each other and not me arguing with both of them. So that was one of the ways I resolved those issues. If you're building a technology that you're actually hoping is going to be a shared technology, shared across multiple teams, another thing we did that was very effective at Adobe, and other companies have adopted as well, but I saw this at Adobe myself, is this idea of shared open source, internal open source. So the Adobe UX framework for native applications was a shared open source piece within the company. So each team had people dedicated to working on that shared UX library and adding tests to make sure that it didn't break their applications when changes went in and things like that. And that worked exceptionally well and scaled very effectively. So that's one way to solve that problem if you're building a shared technology. What this model helps you see, I hope, is that your job is not to convince everyone. It is to engineer a sequence where each step makes the next one easier. And I'll remind you the steps again. Recruit the first mover. Price it as a favor, not a tax. Let results recruit the next team, and settle ownership before scale. A couple places to look if you want to learn more about this or have a deeper guide. There's a book called Influence Without Authority, pretty spot on, from Cohen and Bradford. There's also a research paper they published in a management publication before they wrote the book, which is the condensed version of this, if you can find that. This gives you the underlying idea that you trade in things people actually value, not in being correct. The guiding coalition idea that I used in creating the Spotify career steps is from Kotter's Leading Change, a book I think I've mentioned multiple times before. It's a really good book. That lines up starting from the willing rather from using the org chart. I will link both these books in the show notes. So let's get practical. How do you apply this? What to assess before you start? Where is the pull already? Which team has a problem your change happens to solve today without you having to manufacture the need? So look for that team. Who actually owns the boundary that the work crosses? If the answer is no one, that ambiguity, that's the problem, not the tooling. If you want to run that first adoption, pick a first mover that's small enough to move fast and credible enough that others respect the result. Find a well thought of team in your organization that can leverage the change you're trying to build. Do disproportionate work to make their adoption succeed. The first one is a reference customer, not a fair test of steady state cost. In my case, at Adobe, with this heterogeneous computing technology, that was the After Effects team. A small team, very nimble, well thought of, very bright people. By working with them very closely first, when they adopted it and they found it useful and they talked about it, other teams felt much more comfortable in adopting it. If I'd picked a team that was another brand new team that nobody knew much about, I might not have had the same level of success. Capture the before and after in terms the next team cares about in their language, not in yours. Again, you're understanding, you're having empathy for the incentives other teams have and the way they work. You're not trying to make them feel like this is very foreign to them. You want them to feel like this is something very natural for them to adopt. Now, when you have a team that resists, because you will, even the best ideas, even the best technologies are going to have some resistance. Build the proof points before you ever approach them. Walking in with a working example and 2 peers already using it is a different conversation than just walking in with a proposal. Name the real objection. Resistance framed as technical concerns is often about autonomy, job security, or a team protecting work that they believe defines them. You may be experiencing this right now, even if you're not trying to get other teams to impact a technology. AI moving into all of our organizations. You're seeing how that change is being motivated within your organization. And the resistance that it's bringing will often be about autonomy or job security or developers protecting work they believe defines them, writing code. If you're selling agentic development within your company and developers believe they are code writers, that's going to be a challenge for them, for example. A common failure mode is identifying the one that's going to challenge you and trying to win an argument with them. There is a technique that Cotter talks about, actually called the champion skeptic. I use that. I will bring that person in because I know if I can convince them that they will be able to convince others, but I don't do that as the first step. The cost of that, you spend your best energy on the lowest probability convert while the willing teams wait and kind of cool off or realize this is a problem. You're not solving it for them, so they solve it themselves. If you win the skeptic and lose the willing, you've traded a yes for a maybe. The trade-off to be honest about is that pull is slower than a mandate, as I talked about with career steps. If the company genuinely needs this standardized by next quarter, often that's going to come not as something your team creates, but something dictated by your leadership. Go solve this problem, and then we need everyone to adopt it. So if that is the framing of the problem, the right move may be to go and get the ad executive mandate and accept the shallow buy-in that comes with it. Context decides here, so it's going to depend. Proof recruits better than persuasion, but persuasion is faster than proof. Pick the one that your timeline can afford. So who's going to be your first mover? Often that's going to be someone already frustrated with the status quo and looking for cover to do something about it. Give them the cover and also give them the credit. Everyone will eventually know you're part of this, but again, having others validate your solution and be vocal about it is going to give better proof within the organization that it's the right way to go. If you have a resistor, they rarely resist on the idea of the merits. So they're usually protecting that autonomy or headcount or a sense that this is theirs. This is mine. Why are you intruding onto the thing I own? Treating it as a logic problem when it's a fear problem is often how good proposals die. Keep that in mind. Understand what their real incentives are. Understand what their real motivation is. For the executive you appeal to who won't mandate it, because oftentimes they may either not feel like this is the biggest problem, or they agree it is a big problem. Maybe they don't want to be seen to be forcing solutions down into their own organization. Their reluctance is information, not just an obstacle. If they won't spend authority on it, the change is not yet important enough to the business to survive a fight, and you should plan for that accordingly. If you have peers who see your initiative as encroachment, cross-team change reads as a territory move, whether you mean it that way or not. How you share credit in the first win determines whether the next team see invitation or a takeover. This can feel, especially in really political organizations, this can feel like encroachment. This can feel like you stealing somebody's mandate. How you discuss it, how you share credit, how you listen is going to be the determination whether you're successful or not. Nobody changes how they work to make your life easier. They change it to make their own life easier. Human dynamics shape this outcome. The structural decision about what to standardize matters far less than whether people feel done to or brought in. The mistake I made earlier was believing that the better idea would win on its own, and the job was to prove that clearly enough, was to argue the merits with people that disagreed. The clearer the proof, the more it felt like holdouts were being unreasonable, which made the pushing harder and the resistance deeper. What practice taught that theory didn't was that the merit of the idea and its rate of adoption are nearly independent. You can be completely right and completely stalled at the same time. This frustration I hear so often from leaders. Everyone knows that this is the right thing to do, but no one's doing it. Why aren't they doing it? And how do I make them do it? That question. Where I overcorrected was a stretch of going straight for the executive mandate because it was faster and learning the hard way that compliance bought from the top is rented, not owned, and the lease ends when the executive's attention moves. A change you imposed lasts exactly as long as the pressure that imposed it. Now, the first question is not how do I convince them, but where is this change already wanted and how do I start there? To close out, the core principle, plainly, when you can't order a change, your job is to make the new way the easiest way and let that do the arguing for you. And I would also say, even when you can order a change, you'll be much more successful doing that. Something you can do this week. Take the cross-team change you've been pushing, ask which team would adopt it tomorrow with no convincing at all, and whether you've been spending your time there or on the team fighting you the hardest. If you can't name a single team that already wants it, that's your real finding. The problem isn't adoption yet, it's that the change doesn't yet solve anyone's actual problem. You don't need authority to change how the organization works. You need one team's results that the next team can't ignore. Thanks, everybody. I hope that was helpful. I will see you at some point in August. I haven't decided exactly when, but I'll be back with new episodes in August. In the interim, you'll be getting some of those popular episodes that you might not have heard, or some of the older episodes that I think are worth revisiting. So you'll have a few of those between now and the next new episode. Hopefully a lot of those will be new to you. I'll be doing the same thing in the newsletter. I hope you have a great summer, and I'll see you next week in the newsletter. Back here in 2 weeks with an encore podcast. Have a great week. Thanks for listening to the It Depends podcast. If you liked it, please share it, please rate it, and please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. All music in this episode comes from Answers to April. For more information on Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This is a production of Unit Circle Media.